Hello everyone, in this video I will discuss the animals that were used in the armed forces during the Clone Wars and the Galactic Civil War. If you like what I do, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. You can also support the channel by donating on Patreon. All links are in the description. All of this really helps to develop the channel. Thank you all in advance, and let's get started. I'll begin with the Cavalry of the Grand Army of the Republic. Clones from reconnaissance units were trained to use various riding animals with the help of special simulators. Animals had to be used due to natural conditions, logistical problems, and technical countermeasures in the form of repulsor engine jammers. The most unusual riders of the Grand Army of the Republic were the Gelagrub riders. These creatures are also known as Felucian beetles. The planet Felucia is considered the homeland of Gelagrubs. Thanks to colonists and traders, these animals could also be found on other planets. On Felucia, Gelagrubs lived in mushroom forests, where they found food and could move on vertical surfaces, including upside down. Gelagrubs had a wide mouth, two vertically oriented eyes without pupils, and two rows of short legs that secreted a special sticky substance. This substance allowed them to cling to almost any surface. The translucent covering on the back of the Gelagrub had glands that secreted a substance that protected the larva from excessive solar radiation. The glands required a significant amount of energy to function. Therefore, when not in the shade, Gelagrubs were constantly eating. The main food source for Gelagrubs was Felucian lichen. Only larvae were used as riding animals, as they were not aggressive and were easily tamed. On average, a riding larva was 4 meters long. The Gelagrub remained in this state for several years. During this time, it was possible to tame the larva and teach it the necessary commands. After the larval stage, the Gelagrub pupated. After that, in a few months, it turned into a full-fledged giant beetle with a hard mirror-like shell. In 19 BBY, the Army and Navy of the Grand Army of the Republic began a series of large-scale offensive operations in the Outer Rim. The hot and humid forests of Felucia were one of the many places where the clones had to fight. The Strike Force Command realized that the traditional equipment of the Grand Army of the Republic was poorly suited to local conditions. Therefore, the Grand Army of the Republic created several clone units on Gelagrubs. The Gelagrub riders were scouts, covering infantry and armored columns on the march, protecting heavy equipment from flank attacks, and carrying out sabotage operations. Due to the high cross-country ability and speed of the Gelagrubs, the cavalry units moved through the mushroom forest much faster than mechanized units. They delivered swift strikes and quickly withdrew. The cavalry fought on foot, like regular infantry. Soon the Clone Wars ended, and the Republic was reborn as the Empire, but the cavalry on Gelagrubs continued to exist. Realizing the potential of Gelagrub larvae, scientists from Rothanta Heavy Engineering used genetic engineering to develop a new subspecies. The scientists stopped the development of Gelagrubs at the larval stage. The new Gelagrubs did not pupate like their relatives, remaining in the larval stage for their entire lives. This significantly increased the Gelagrub's service life and reduced the cost of such cavalry. Geneticists from the planet Rothana also created special feed, as it was difficult to find suitable food for the ever-hungry Gelagrubs on other planets. Troops riding Gelagrubs were used by soldiers of the Imperial Army and Assault Corps and on some planets of the galaxy with difficult terrain. Genetically modified Gelagrubs were bred exclusively for the Empire and were controlled by specially trained military personnel, mainly scouts. However, Gelagrubs were not suitable for life on cold planets. Therefore, on the planet Tula, local animals called mastmots were used for military purposes. Mastmots were very large animals covered with thick, long fur that protected them from the cold. The average mastmot was 12 meters tall and 15 meters long and weighed at least 8 tons. Mastmots did not move very fast. The main advantage of mastmots was their large carrying capacity. This allowed mastmots to be used as a replacement for cargo speeders to transport ammunition, medicine, and food. The mastmot's back was wide and could be used as a platform. Most often, mastmots were used as transport and artillery platforms. 2 seats were placed on either side of the animal, on which a stationary rapid-fire blaster was mounted. This helped mastmots provide fire support to infantry. Mastmots could not completely replace light armored vehicles due to their low survivability. Small fragments and shots from a light blaster were not dangerous to mastmots. In addition, mastmots could panic like ordinary peaceful herbivores. The Whiphids had long used mastmots as draft and riding animals. Mastmot meat was eaten, their hides were used to make warm coats, carpets, and roofs for dwellings, and their bones were used to make tools and as building material. For the Grand Army of the Republic, the use of masmots was limited to Tula and a few planets with similar climates. Masmots were used in the armed forces only during the Clone Wars and at the beginning of the Imperial period. When considering the use of combat animals on cold planets, it is worth paying attention to the Aelids. These were furry ice worms from the planet Korm. Aelids had the ability to move quickly under ice and snow. The rider rode in the Aelid's mouth, controlling it with reins attached to the outside. In hibernation, Aelids preferred to burrow into the snow or dig a hole in the ice. Aelids were summoned by a sound signal emitted from a special metal pipe. The Kormi race from the planet Korm had been using domesticated Aelids as a means of transportation for at least several millennia. Republic soldiers did not use Aelids for long. Repulsor technology, such as AAT tanks, was more effective. Another rare type of mount used for a short time by the clones of the Grand Army of the Republic were Skaldur. Skaldur were large herbivorous animals with an average height of 3.5 meters. An interesting feature of these animals was their very thick and durable hide. Skaldurs lived on Florum among the plains of Dosher, which were characterized by a large number of acid geysers. The thick hide of the Skaldur provided reliable protection against the acid. Blaster shots were also no threat to them. Skaldurs were easily tamed, as Senator Jar Jar Binks proved. Skaldurs were not part of the permanent arsenal of the Grand Army of the Republic, nor were they part of the Empire. Now I will move on to discussing the more common animals in the galactic forces. I'll start with blurgs. These hardy and resilient bipedal reptiles could be found on many planets in the Star Wars universe. The main reasons for the spread of blurgs in the galaxy were their resilience in different climatic conditions and their unpretentiousness in food. The blurg's wide mouth and flat teeth allowed the animal to chew or grind almost any type of grass, leaves, or roots. It was difficult to find grass in the galaxy that could not be digested in a blurg's stomach. Although blurgs were herbivores, they could sometimes display uncontrollable aggression, especially towards strangers, or attack them on their owner's orders. An adult blurg reached a height of 2.5 to 3 meters. Its body weight was about half a ton. Most often, blurgs were beige or brown in color, although depending on the planet and the wishes of geneticists, blurgs could have any coat color. On most primitive planets, blurgs were used as draft and pack animals. On other planets, blurgs were used in zoos or as riding animals for recreational rides. Sometimes blurgs were used in armies. Cavalry units on blurgs operated both on horseback and on foot. During the war with the Separatists, clones of the Grand Army of the Republic sometimes used blurgs as a replacement for light ATRT and CPW reconnaissance and assault walkers. During the Battle of Ryloth, 22 years before the Battle of Yavin, troops of clone infantry and local militiamen riding blurgs were used to attack Separatist positions. For example, blurgs were used during the assault on Lesu, a strategically important Ryloth city. They operated alongside ATRT walkers. The successful use of blurgs, which increased the mobility of the infantry during the events on Ryloth, attracted the interest of the Republic command. Therefore, blurgs were sometimes seen in use in the future. Most often, clones on blurgs performed the functions of dragoons. They flanked or rear-attacked enemy units, appearing from the most unexpected directions. The high speed of the mounts on rough terrain allowed the cavalry units to take up a favorable position before the enemy. Then the clones dismounted and fought on foot, using light firearms. Blurgs were perfectly suited for transporting small loads. In the army, this could be weapons, food supplies, and medicines. Blurgs could also be used to transport the wounded and sick in rough terrain, where ground vehicles could not reach and air evacuation was not possible. In the Galactic Empire, cavalry units, including those on blurgs, were also rarely used, but their numbers were significantly greater than among the units of the Republic Army during the Clone Wars. Also in the Empire, animal breeding and rider training were better organized. In the Grand Army of the Republic, the cavalry was created during the war years, and cavalry units were formed within a few weeks or even days. Rothana Heavy Engineering also turned its attention to breeding blurgs. In a short time, Rothana's livestock breeders built large complexes for breeding blurgs, driving out smaller competitors. Breeding blurgs was not difficult. They reproduced quickly and were not prone to disease. One female blurg laid 5 or 6 eggs in a single season. Blurgs were not only sold to the Imperial Armed Forces. Anyone could buy them. The cost of a healthy adult blurg was 2,000 credits. It was cheaper to buy in bulk. A small herd of 12 animals sold for 20,000 Imperial credits. Blurgs were bred on one of the desert planets in the Gaulis sector. During the Galactic Civil War, blurgs were used in garrisons on the periphery and less frequently in the more civilized worlds of the colonies and the Middle Ring. Blurgs were not the most common mounts for Imperial soldiers. The most common animals of the Imperial Cavalry were dewbacks. Imperial soldiers most likely preferred dewbacks because of their stability. They had 4 legs, were larger than blurgs, and could carry more payload. In addition, dewbacks could run just as fast and for just as long. A dewback is a large, 4-legged omnivorous reptile native to Tatooine. An adult dewback was 1.5 to 2 meters tall, 2 to 3 meters long, and weighed about 800 kilograms. Dewbacks had light green, beige, or brown skin. The green and light gray skin of dewbacks contained a special melanin that reduced the impact of the solar radiation of Tatooine's 2 suns on their internal organs. Melanin also allowed them to retain moisture, which enabled them to withstand the heat for long periods of time and go without water for long periods. In the wild, dewbacks, especially on Tatooine, lived in small flocks. This made it easier for them to defend themselves against large predators and search for food. This activity took up the entire daylight hours of the dewbacks. At night, the dewbacks were minimally active. Dewbacks were cold-blooded, so at night, when the temperature dropped sharply, they became sluggish and lethargic. The flock of dewbacks slept huddled together with their backs pressed against each other. This allowed the animals to retain heat better. During the night, dew accumulated on the animals' backs, which served as a source of moisture in the morning. Licking the dew off the backs of other dewbacks strengthened friendly and family relationships within the herd. Dewbacks did not form large herds. The more dewbacks there were, the less food and water they could find. On other planets where temperature fluctuations were not as extreme, wild dewbacks could live in large herds or even alone. Tatooine dewbacks fed on local vegetation, finding it among rocks and boulders, as well as digging through the sand with their paws in search of tubers. Tatooine cacti served as food and a source of moisture for the dewbacks. In addition, dewbacks loved to hunt womp rats, scurriers, and other small Tatooine creatures. Wild dewbacks were not dangerous to humans or other large intelligent species. Dewbacks would only attack humans in self-defense or when very hungry. Dewbacks had a calm disposition, which is why they were often hunted by Tatooine colonists. The colonists obtained a good source of meat and skins from the dewbacks. During the mating season, the Tatooine dewbacks migrated to the Jundland wastes. The males attracted the attention of the females by rolling on their backs and exposing their unprotected bellies. Sometimes there were skirmishes between pairs of dewbacks over a female that could produce healthy offspring. The mating season for dewbacks began immediately after the mating season for crate dragons ended. This helped most of the dewback eggs survive. The sand in the Jundland waste was ideal for laying eggs. After mating, females laid their eggs in a deep hole in the sand and forgot about them. 6 months later, the little dewback hatched from the egg and was already independent. The instinct to migrate for mating according to the calendar and lay eggs in the desert made it impossible to breed them in captivity on Tatooine. The mating of dewbacks on planets such as Brika in the Catavine sector or Benja Rin in the Sebastal sector did not depend on other animals. These and other similar planets became breeding grounds for dewbacks for the Imperial Cavalry. Tame dewbacks lived best, but during mating season they were always drawn to the wastelands. Therefore, during mating season, owners would release their dewbacks. After finding a female and mating, tame dewbacks always returned home. The Galactic Empire's Assault Corps used dewbacks in long operations in difficult terrain, conducted far from bases and with little air support from transport shuttles. The tactics of the assault troops on dewbacks were similar to those of any cavalry unit, except for one feature. Due to the sluggishness and drowsiness of dewbacks when the temperature dropped sharply, the cavalry could only operate effectively during daylight hours. Dewback riders were most effective in long patrols, search operations, long-range reconnaissance, and swift flank attacks. The cavalry was also effective against unarmored and lightly armored vehicles. The assault troops of the cavalry units wore standard armor and were armed with the standard weapons of the Assault Corps. The only difference was the use of 3-meter energy pikes, long-barreled blaster cannons, and flamethrowers. The presence of long-barreled DLT-19 heavy blaster rifles and T-21 light automatic blasters is explained by the long distances of firefights in the desert. Mounted flamethrowers were effective against infantry and unarmored vehicles. The carrying capacity of the dewbacks allowed the cavalry unit to transport a large number of shells. At the beginning of the Galactic Civil War, the cavalry participated in several significant operations. In addition to the well-known operation to search for drones, the Imperial Cavalry participated in the Battle of Yavin. After the destruction of the first Death Star, cavalry units captured the rebels' poorly equipped defensive positions. Later, the cavalry was effectively used in the liberation of the planet Reta from the star system of the same name in the Heron sector. Reta was one of the largest agricultural planets in this sector of the galaxy. Its capture by the rebels could have led to a food crisis and mass uprisings in many star systems. Another example of the effective use of dewback cavalry was the battle for Zalorias in the Ascarian sector. In the 25th year before the Battle of Yavin, after Minister Trance Dakar's demands for Zaloria's independence, Darth Vader arrived there. At the same time, armed separatist units and Rebel Alliance militants took control of the capital city of Zalorias. They also captured the AT-AT Walker testing ground and took the local garrison stormtroopers prisoner. Darth Vader arrived with a squad of stormtroopers and a small number of soldiers from the local garrison. This garrison consisted of infantry and cavalry. With the help of the cavalry and infantry, Darth Vader first captured the testing ground and freed the captured stormtroopers. After that, the AT-AT Walkers, infantry, and cavalry captured the capital. A large group of rebels was defeated, and the cavalry on dewbacks searched for the escaped rebels. The spread of dewbacks throughout the galaxy was facilitated by the Rothana Heavy Engineering Company. Livestock breeders from Rothana were engaged in the mass breeding and sale of dewbacks, including to the armed forces of the Empire. The rebels also used dewbacks. The reason for this was the ease with which they could be acquired. Since dewbacks were not considered weapons or military equipment, Rothana sold them to Imperials, rebels, and anyone else who wanted them. The Alliance's special forces used dewbacks for covert long-distance travel and surprise attacks. It is known that special forces known as wilderness fighters sometimes fought while riding dewbacks. The Alliance's special forces did not only ride dewbacks. The choice of animals depended on the nature of the mission and the availability of the animals themselves. They used methnaps. These were rare sea animals 12 to 15 meters long. Their special forces used them during sabotage operations on the planet Chadra, most of which was covered with water. Imperial troops mainly used land animals. The only known winged animals officially in service with the Empire were the Aiwas. Aiwas are winged cetacean creatures native to Kamino. The average adult Aiwa had a wingspan of 11 meters and a body length of 8 to 10 meters, including the tail and fin. Their body weight was 1,200 kilograms. Aiwas were rare creatures that could be used equally effectively on water, underwater, and in the air. The first deliveries of Aiwas to the troops began after the end of the Clone Wars. In the Imperial forces, Aiwas were used as part of the garrisons on the periphery. It was there that their use was justified, as there was no need to bring food from other planets especially for them. Thanks to the fact that Aiwas were excellent swimmers both on and underwater, they were used by Imperial combat swimmers. The cost of a trained and broken-in Aiwa was 45,000 credits. For comparison, a TIE fighter cost only 15,000 more. Large cargo Aiwas could cost even more. In addition to the Empire, Aiwas were used by the Gungans. Aiwas were used as fighters and bombers. For the Kaminoans, Aiwas were only a means of transportation. There are no known examples of Aiwas being used by rebels. The rebels used any weapons and military equipment available. Mounted animals were no exception. It is not known for certain when the rebels began using Bergrutfa. Bergrutfa resembled Earth dinosaurs in appearance. The desert planet Telok Olsen, located in the Eklerar sector of the Middle Ring, was considered the homeland of these giants. Even before the Galactic Empire, Bergrutfa had spread throughout the galaxy. Thanks to their calm temperament, good endurance, and great physical strength, Bergrutfa were excellent draft animals. An adult Bergrutfa stood between 6 and 7 meters tall and weighed over 4 tons. Bergrutfa feed on tree leaves and fruits, grass, and nuts. Their stomachs could digest almost any plant food, which allowed them to spread throughout the galaxy. Bergrutfa were occasionally used by special forces of the Rebel Alliance and the New Republic. Due to their size and slowness, Bergrutfa were used for assault operations and sabotage. The Bergrutfa's skin is very thick and durable. It is difficult to pierce with an arrow, spear, or even a vibro sword. The sturdy armor on their heads allowed Bergrutfa to break through fortifications and barricades, as well as thin walls and houses. Their strength and endurance allowed Bergrutfa to be used to transport barrel artillery and mount weapons on their backs. Bergrutfa were difficult to transport and feed, so the most common rebel mounts were Tauntauns and Cracian Thumpers. First, let's talk about Tauntauns. Tauntauns were two-legged, warm-blooded animals. A thick layer of subcutaneous fat, multi-chambered lungs, and wool protected tauntauns from the cold of Hoth. The fat allowed the tauntauns to go without food for several days. Tauntauns fed on plant food. The height of an adult tauntaun was from 1.5 to 2 meters. There were also so-called giant tauntauns, which reached a height of up to 3 meters. The average body length of a tauntaun was about 4 meters. It is known that the first units of horsemen on tauntauns appeared during the Galactic Civil War on Hoth. The reason for this was the cold climate of the planet, which made it impossible to use land speeders and air spaders. In the harsh weather conditions of Hoth, repulsors and engines were rendered inoperable by the cold. The rebels used their tauntauns to organize mounted patrols around Echo Base and deliver small cargoes. The main disadvantages of tauntauns were their difficulty to tame and their cowardice. It is known that tauntaun riders, among other units, participated in the large-scale battle for Hanun in the 6th year after the Battle of Yavin. The Cracian Thumper was a much more common mount for the Rebel Alliance. Cracian Thumpers are more obedient and better suited for cavalry units than the unruly Thumpers. Cracian Thumpers were easier to tame and much harder to scare. Even when attacked, they remained calm. In addition, Cracian Thumpers were quite resilient. They could maintain a speed of 30 to 35 kilometers per hour for several hours, while moving almost silently. Moreover, the endurance of Cracian Thumpers allowed them to be used for transporting cargo. Cracian Thumpers originated from the planet Cracy, the capital planet of the star system of the same name in the corporate sector. For thousands of years, the population of Cracy used Cracian Thumpers as riding and pack animals. One of the largest spaceports in this part of the corporate sector was located here. The natural characteristics of the Cracian Thumper, combined with the availability of a good port, attracted great interest in the animals from traders in live goods. By the time of the Clone Wars and the Galactic Civil War, Cracian Thumpers could be found throughout the galaxy. They were considered one of the most common riding animals. Their prevalence and selective breeding led to the emergence of many subspecies with slight differences in skull shape, coat density and length, and height. Cracian Thumpers were bipedal herbivorous mammals. The average height of an adult Cracian Thumper was 1 meter 80 centimeters. They had soft pads on their feet and could move almost silently. Unlike tauntauns, Cracian Thumpers had flexible front paws and long, sharp claws. A Cracian Thumper could kill a human or seriously injure a Wookiee with a single precise blow. Cracian Thumpers were herbivores. These animals were easy to train. Their good memory allowed them to remember their owner and the appearance of their enemies even before meeting them. Cracian Thumpers were also very loyal. If the owner took good care of them, they would remain attached to him for the rest of their lives. Thanks to the popularity of domesticated Cracian Thumpers and the widespread presence of their wild relatives in the galaxy, these animals attracted little attention from the Imperials. Customs officials never considered Cracian Thumpers transported in the hold to be combat units. Instead, these woolly bipeds were very popular with the Rebel Alliance and the New Republic. Most often, Cracian Thumpers were ridden by Special Forces soldiers who scouted the terrain before the main forces landed, saboteurs, and specialists in combat operations in desert and wooded areas. The rebels used riders on Cracian Thumpers as part of the garrisons at bases on the planets Fango, Nishir, and Denkayo. They were also used by the armed forces of the Galactic Empire. Scouts rode Cracian Thumpers as it was very difficult for tracking stations to detect them and distinguish them from wild animals. The same company, Rothana Heavy Engineering, was responsible for breeding Cracian Thumpers and supplying them to the Imperial forces. The cost of one specimen was 2,000 credits. Special and well-trained breeds cost between 5 and 7,000 credits. However, these were more often used by athletes than the military. Racing on Cracian Thumpers was a popular pastime among the aristocrats of the Tapani sector. Of course, I didn't cover all the animals in the armies in this video, but I think I managed to cover the main types of creatures. Thank you for watching this video to the end. If you like what I do, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. You can also help the channel by donating on Patreon. All links are in the description. All of this really helps to develop the channel. See you all later.